Two Country Boys in Cali. This is Ashton Morris. I am back with a special guest. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Neighbor Skylar Nelson, man, representing Flint, Michigan. Got my Detroit Pistons hat on to represent my Michigan folk. Also represent my Y'all Have No Idea podcast, which you can find on every podcast platform, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, all of your major podcast platforms. And I'm just a regular guy. Glad to be here.
Oh yeah, he is not a regular guy, but what we want to do is kind of talk about and discuss and really bring in is the highlight of a lot of the major issues that have kind of been going on with Kwame Brown. We'll discuss a lot of the things that was conspiring between like Joe Budden's sudden like disastrous blow up and everything, and how a lot of this stuff is centered towards like black men and the black male ego, because I think that's an important thing. And I haven't really had a lot of people discuss this. And in our different like various groups that he's in with me, such as the Wavement and Run Your Mouth, and even like this other sports group, Let's Talk Sports. I'm plugging all of y'all so you can listen and you'll get members and then just subscribe to Ashton. But a lot of those things have been going on, talking about just everything and just going from there. So I want to talk about them because this is the oldest one. So we'll stalk and we'll really target with the ego first and foremost of what the thing is. What the fuck happened with the Joe Budden podcast?
Oh God, Joey. So I hope everyone has been paying attention to what's been happening on with Joe. We know the Joe Budden podcast, one of the biggest podcast platforms out there, especially for us in the Black community. Huge platform, Rory and Maul. They've been there almost from the beginning. Not at the very beginning, but almost from the beginning. And so for years, Joe has been grinding. We know what Joe has been doing with his podcast, taking it on the road, going on tours, and pretty much just rebranding himself as a huge media presence out there in the world of hip hop. And everything was well and fine. Last year, he had a situation with his quote unquote smear campaign, or whoever was quote unquote a part of that. And then we already know just recently we seen what happened with Joe and Roy and Maul getting into it, not showing up for the podcast, and everybody wondering what's going on. And this is just off of his breakup with Spotify. And Joe just being regular Joe. I know that's kind of cliche to say for those who know Joe, been around Joe, seen his work, dealt with him, did business with him. And of course, we know what happened. It all blew up. Joe said what he said, fired Rory on his podcast, pretty much said, Maul, you could kick rocks too. And of course, social media gasses everything. So we see how that also played a major role. And now we see that Rory and Maul has their own thing going on and has their own podcast going on, and which is pending. And then, of course, Joe responded to all of that. So I don't know, man. Joe, we all like Joe. I love Joe the rapper, of course. Anybody that knows me know I'm a huge Joe Budden fan of the rapper. Entrepreneur Joe, on the other hand, business relationship Joe, he has his days with me. He has his days. We can go all the way back to his Hot 97 days back in the early 2000s. We could talk about his Slaughterhouse stuff, stuff with Complex, which was huge. I just don't know. I don't know with Joe. I say issues there. They're good guys. I like them. But you could just tell the dynamic with the Joe Budden podcast isn't the same as it was prior to Rory and Maul being there. And for lack of a better term, it's fucked up what he did. This is keep it 100. It is. We've talked about it ad nauseum almost, and you just got to handle yourself better with business, period. And you can't do your friends dirty, even if you don't think that the insinuation is, oh, they never talked ownership. They weren't there for free. They weren't there to just, shoot the breeze, laughs and giggles. They was there to help you build your platform. That's just how I feel about it. That's how I felt about it since he went on his little rants, as he always does.
Yeah. So my thing with that is like, and this is kind of gonna be like a two topic conversation, and we'll kind of discuss this on. So do you think like a lot of black entertainers and black people get a pass just because of all the systematic racism that we have went through in business and in like art forms, that like the fan base and a lot of people give them an excuse to be a fuck up? That's one thing too.
Right.
And then two, is this a preventive thing with when it comes to like doing black business and art and sport and everything, where like we can truly separate the ego of like their, because I've always said like hip hop is a very like overly driven ego sport art form, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
like it transitions to business and it creates a lot of bad business. We've seen this with Jay-Z, we've seen this with Diddy, Suge Knight, the list goes on. So what is your response on both of those things?
Well, we know the male ego can be fragile, especially in hip hop. And with Joe being who he was in hip hop, I mean, let's be honest. Joe was, you could say, a lack of a better term, some people may say he was a flop. I don't consider Joe a flop. If you really look and research Joe's resume and his catalog, I wouldn't consider what Joe did a flop. I think we measure success by record sales, Billboard charts, all of that stuff. And we know Joe wasn't the hugest, the biggest success in that realm. However, I think with him being in that space and being in hip hop, I think he felt like he had to kind of prove himself over and over and over again. And once he started seeing a little bit of that success that he tasted, I think his ego kind of um, told him the story of, well, I made it now, and you can't tell me anything. And so I think sometimes we try to give people passes for bad behavior, even if they are one of us. But at the end of the day, we know because we are who we are, being black men, being black women in entertainment, we just have to be a little bit more cautious. So there's like a catch 22 in that. But I don't think Joe sometimes even cares about that. I think he cares about what he cares about and he keeps it going. And he just has to, again, continue to be careful with how he presents himself, especially with this Olivia Dope stuff coming out now. He just has to present himself in a better manner versus him being so, rah rah like a Dungeon Dragon every single time something doesn't go his way. And not just him, but for everybody.
Yeah, and like I said, so like I said, so do you think this is like a lot of these things are preventative measure? Because I, like you said, the same thing with the Olivia Dope and with the a lot of the things that have kind of been transpiring. So I've always kind of said this when it comes to black men and me, and that's garnering success and everything too.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my biggest things when it comes to like I guess when it comes to pertaining towards black women is like protect them in the same way as you do your mama, your grandmama when it comes to whatever form. Like hold the every black woman universally to the same standard unless they show you something different. Like
Right.
come in those relationships like that. Like even if like they do whatever, like they could be doing OnlyFans or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Still respect them in that entity and give them their respective space that they show otherwise. There's things that change or things that separate and garner that. And then two, kind of just like I was mentioning the same thing about it. Like, is there a thing where it comes where like black men overall can just do better business when it comes to like building these type of relationship shows and television and art and everything else? Because it's not even just like I could say Joe. I feel like that was the same issue. Some of these same things that have garnered with Joe, I feel like was also the demise of Salim Akil a little bit when it comes to like
Mm-hmm.
all his television, when it comes to women and the ego and shit. Like it's a constant thing that happens with black
Yeah.
dudes and art and music and media and shit. And like Joe's clearly lost the Cash App deal over this shit, or it's on chill or whatever the fuck. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
already lost six figures just dealing with that stuff. And it's
Right.
like when it comes to women, like, okay, yeah, Joe, you was dealing with women. You've been dealing with attractive women and saying shit like that all your life. You got money now. You know what I'm saying? You understand when it comes with money, there's a certain reputation, a certain respect that you're supposed to have. And you can't be doing that same shit. Men get away with fucked up shit when they broke. I hate to say it. Like they
Yeah,
don't
you
come
got that right.
public life. You can say, man, I want to eat your ass and do all this other shit because nobody's not gonna see it. Telling the girl when you got millions of followers you want to eat your ass. It's a different conversation.
Right.
And then, like you said, the whole issue with him and the ego and with Maul and all of them asking, when you're doing business with people, man, do business fair. Like it's clearly knows that like you, regardless of whatever their contracting situation is, clearly he is on the downside of it. You saw Kevin Hart saying you didn't treat that situation right. And then he tried to come for Kevin Hart. I'm like, I don't have too much outside of the other little issue with the guy that was possibly taking money from him. Most of his employees typically have been paid right, been paid fair. And then on, just a lot of the issues too, like you said, you see that new situation, they got Kevin Durant backing. That's more money than Joe got. I'm sorry. So it's like you're getting people taking the right side of it. And these are guys that, like you said, when you bring certain people in certain areas, like a Maul, Jamil, and Roy, like these people got experience working within the industry. They have family relationships within the industry. Maul's been kind of like doing this caretaking sports management shit with these athletes. So like you losing out that shit. And to be honest, why your podcast became so popular was because of both of those guys with the music connections. Because Joe, you don't have those music collections. You had, and that's the sense of humility. Like maybe, okay, I don't pay them this, but I gotta pay them this because they're kind of getting this for me, and they're bringing this news, and they're drawing this type of power. And I know this, and people want to say, "Oh, they're born out," but that's how dynamics work. When you do media, nobody hires and meet new media shit. We could go on like the wrestling standards of like the play-by-play guy isn't same as color. You know what I'm saying? And it's always going to be different. Jim Ross was always different than Jerry the King Lawler. If they was the same person, you wouldn't be entertained by that.
100%. 100% agree with that. I'm glad you used that wrestling analogy I mean, obviously things work for what it is. Roy and Maul worked perfectly with that system. And again, I have nothing against Ice and Ish. Two great guys, seem like they know what they're doing, obviously. But the dynamic with Roy and Maul being there, it was a drastic shift once you noticed that they were gone. And Joe can deny it all he wants to, but he realizes also that dynamic was what made that podcast what it was. I mean, when Marissa was there, and I liked Marissa when she was there early on, but once, and that's a whole nother discussion, but you just knew once they were gone, the dynamic, it just shifted. And hopefully he learns his lesson from this, but knowing Joe and his business dealings with other people, I don't know if he's going to learn his lesson or not. So we'll just wait and see. We'll wait and see.
And that's one of those things too. And like you mentioned, Marissa, you mentioned the Scotty B, you mentioned like a lot of relationships with him, people and me. It's just a bad thing to go. And it's like, where do you as a black man kind of like chin check and like really say, how I'm gonna get there, who I'm gonna do these certain things for? Like, do you really invest in it? Because it's clearly the dynamic. And it's like, and I kind of understand and just shifting this into that, like the ego and like being fragile is the Kwame Brown, whatever this is. Like, I'm not sitting, you know what I'm saying? Kwame Brown is what Kwame Brown is. You got different opinions. I'll play devil's advocate, whatever your opinion. But first and foremost, what do you think about all the shit that's going on with Kwame Brown? All the smoke and all this shit?
Where do I start?
We got 15 minutes, man. So
yeah. So I'll be brief. We all know who Kwame Brown was. Number 1 draft pick, Washington Wizards, drafted by Jordan. We don't even need to go through his entire history of what he was in the NBA. This all goes back to the original premise of black male egos. And we've seen for years Stephen A. Smith, every chance he got to talk about Kwame Brown, he did talk about him. I remember those earlier segments before First Take when it was, when it was still in his cold pizza days, and when Stephen A. first came to ESPN, and how much he just dug into Kwame Brown's tail every single chance he got. And of course, 20 years later, after him being drafted, Kwame Brown just got tired. We know what happened with the All the Smoke podcast with Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes, and them kind of snickling and giggling on the Genie Bus episode, which I listened to, by the way. I actually am subscribed to that podcast. So I listened, and it wasn't, to me, I'm gonna be honest, it wasn't nearly as bad as everybody made it out to be, but still, it was what it was. And then Kwame came out swinging. Now, that was almost 2 weeks ago. So he came out swinging, came for everybody. Steven Jackson, Matt Barnes, Charlemagne did what he did in his idiocy, mentioned his family, came for him. Just a couple of days ago, Boyce Watkins had an opinion, came for him. And then Stephen A. Smith just yesterday responded on his Stephen A. World on ESPN Plus. And it's been a back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm all for Kwame Brown coming out and defending himself. But I do have a caution with that, because his subscribers before all of this was only 20K on YouTube. Now his subscribers is at 245K. And I think that we as Black people have this tendency to, when it's drama involved, we're quick to subscribe to it, because he clapped at Steven Jackson, clapped at Matt Barnes, clapped at Charlemagne, clapped at everybody else. And now it's like, okay, Kwame, I'm all for Kwame Brown clapping. It's cool. He has a right to defend himself, and everybody else, 20 years. I get it. Mama's cooking. I get it. But also, he has to make sure that he's careful, because he don't want that to be his lasting impression. So I'm interested to see what happens moving forward. I just want these brothers to just sit in the room and just shoot the fade if they got to, fisticuffs if they got to. But all of them guys have to be careful, because now that you open it up for social media and YouTube and the commenters, now you open it up for everybody to have an opinion. And if anyone gets juiced off of the opinions of social media, I got to feed the flock. And what better way for me to feed the flock by continuously bashing people in public? And that's not just for Kwame Brown, that's for all of them. And they all have to make sure that they're being careful doing that.
Yeah, you're right about that. And that's my thing too. Like this just back thing. Like, that's one of my prime examples of like what we want to discuss. Like, Kwame Brown, for the last 20 years, his ego, his mind, and his probably self-esteem is fragile as fuck. Like, we can agree to that. Everybody agree to that. This is where I kind of like, I understand where Kwame is coming from. Like, both Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes have made this personification of they're this big tough guys. And personally, me, I'm not trying to be like whatever. I don't me as somebody who can, I guess, be labeled a tough guy, I don't see all this toughness and shit that they supposedly have. But this is me as somebody who's supposed to be a, legitimate tough guy. So I see them like just barking and yelling at this still kid, because he's older. They're older than both of them, sonning them to this degree, and he kind of going in from there. Like I said, I do agree with you, just like you mentioned before, is like, there's one thing that we talk about, and a lot of people talk about recently, is like, a lot of people complain about, we always got these tragedy Black movies, we always got these tragedy slave movies and all this other shit, which is true. Hollywood does do that. But on the flip scale, everybody loves all this tragedy and trauma and all this other shit on social media. So, and I tell people all the time, at least the meetings that I have been in Hollywood and the auditions and everything, white people only give me all the shit y'all want. Like, that's just being transparent with that. Like, they see us arguing and fighting on social media, YouTube. Of course, they're gonna think some baby mama movie is gonna sell well. Like, it's just, they're just taking what they're getting from us. Sometimes they completely wrong, But a lot of times too is the energy we give out. It's like positive content gets less subscription than the black trauma, the black street fights, the bum fights, the crackhead, some shit like that. One person who was a prime example of showing that is Freddie Gibbs. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, look at his subscribers. Look how many people pay attention to when he posts negative stuff versus like the actual music. I think he has more of a following for his negative shit than his actual skill set, which is, you know, a troubling thing too. And I mean, he has his own personal issues that ain't my business to put out. But, you know, I've showed you some of that. But it's like, where do you draw the line between that? Where do you draw the line between those certain things too? It's like Kwame. Okay, do I consider Kwame Brown a bust in like the technical? And I'm a stats guy. From an analytical, you're the number one overall. You didn't pan out. You was a low end rotational player, fringe starter. By what a bust means from a statistical standpoint in the sports analogies, yes, you are a bust. Are you a bust as a human? You haven't been in prison. You don't have any criminal record. All of the family side stuff that Charlemagne should have never put out because that was 100% disrespectful.
100%.
You take care of your mama. You are not a bust in that factor. You are a very, very brave and hardworking young man who made a lot of sacrifices to take care of your family. All due respect, but you got to find the guideline, and that's maybe getting therapy and talking with somebody, like and addressing that. And it's like everybody always talk about therapy, but nobody really goes along about it because therapy is so new within the Black community. So it's like Kwame, it's like, okay, get that stuff privately. If you still want to do these type of videos, I do think it's a mode for him. But do I think it's attacking these guys? No. And that's the same thing with those guys attacking each other. No. And like you said, I'm all for shooting the face, stretching somebody out, moving chairs. You know, I tell people that all the time. Like, I'll move a chair. But sometimes I do think that is the only resort. Just being respectful. Like, that's the only resort. Like sometimes I gotta, you know what I'm saying, do that to like get somebody to understand it. And it's a bad thing, but it's like that's just reality of life. So I don't really know where this goes. Hopefully this shit cleans up. I did watch the Stephen A joint. I didn't like how he announced it though. Cause I felt like that was too much of a ratings thing. I don't like the announcing of it on the YouTube, then go on the ESPN Plus, and then drop the video on ESPN YouTube. I'm like, ESPN, ABC, y'all got to do better on that shit because y'all just trying to make money. So that was my issue with that. That's a big issue for me. If I met Stephen A, I was like, you could have just dropped that to people who regularly watch. You didn't have to make that a spectacle because that's like you drawing money. You trying to make money for the company type stuff. I don't like that. You know what I'm saying? That's not, that ain't what we need to be doing to each other as Black men, like profiting off of like dissing each other and shit. And I said that recently we can kind of talk about this shit with the Drake and, you know, Pusha T. That shit's what, 3 years old now. I don't like them coming. I think that's like real street code. Like you don't, women, children, sick. You don't play in those areas on both sides, Drake and Pusha T. Like, and that's the same thing when it comes to Kwame and Stephen A and all of them. Like Kwame mentioned dudes' kids. Like, you don't play in that area. Like, that's the shit you don't play with, you know. I don't like that type of shit. I say that too to all of them. Like, y'all don't play with each other, bringing up each other's families, bringing that. Y'all keep that beef between men. That's some other shit that we got to start getting back on, especially the Black men. Like, I feel like we're using hip hop to feel like no holds barred. I'm like, nah, people still shoot people for like disrespecting family because that's still streets of the code. Y'all want to put hip hop and urban culture in the street. It's too murky with all that. Like, you got to be flat footed because everybody coming from the same worlds are close adjacent. So that's just my opinion on that.
Agree 100%. I just want these brothers to just sit in the room and just talk it out. And I think that's another thing that needs to happen. Just sit in the room and talk it out. There's nothing wrong with talking. Nothing wrong with just airing it out. I think social media kind of gasses the situation and green lights a little bit more than it needs to be. And if you get enough juice in your system with someone constantly telling you, get him, get him, get him, get him, get him, you're going to continue to follow that mold. And that's what I'm afraid of for Kwame. I just want him to be successful. And I'm glad that he's getting this buzz now. But like I said on my podcast, a month from now, how much buzz are you really still going to have? Or how many people still going to have your back? Like I said, I told my co-host this, like when Kendrick Lamar said, when shit hit the fan, is you still a fan? We'll see. We'll see. So, you know.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. It's like, we can kind of go on like the wrestler terminology of like Kwame's working the gimmick. It's like he's working the gimmick to the best. But what happens when you gotta change the gimmick and like revamp the thing? It's like the gimmicks come out first. Like we see it, and like I guess like shit, we seeing this shit a lot now with like black wrestlers and like revamping gimmicks and the gimmick getting tired and old, and then trying to create a new gimmick. I mean, Apollo Crews, and we saw that shit with Bobby Lashley. Sometimes the gimmick works, you know. You get the Hurt Business. Another time you get shit. I don't know, some bullshit. The Fiend.
You know, I was gonna say Bray Wyatt. That was my example.
Yeah, it's like, and that's just the thing for everybody who in the podcast don't watch wrestling. Like that's the thing. You need to start about watching wrestling. Everybody watching it. Griselda, Drake walking around with championship belts. Wrestling and MMA is back popular. And boxing,
pop culture.
Yeah, pop culture shit. Grow up.
Oh yeah,
everybody knows scripted. They dope. All your favorite actors are ex wrestlers and shit. I mean, Dave Bautista, The Rock, John Cena, Hulk Hogan, Debo. Rest in peace. Yep. Everybody came from that world, but yeah, that's not exactly what we're talking about. But it's just a sad situation. It was entertaining when it first came in. Then Kwame is like, but that's the same thing with all of these dudes. Like, I just want all of this stuff to get in. And even if like the ego like don't work out, like sometimes you just like when you go to like black ego, like sometimes you just need to get it out of you. Like J. Cole going to go play overseas and being trash. But at least he got this whole thing of like, man, I could have made it to the NBA. No, you couldn't have. And he understood.
Not with them layups he was doing over there in Rwanda. Nah. Nah.
You gonna get a J. Cole jersey though?
Never. I'm a Cole guy, but nah.
I might have to get the jersey, man. I talked about the album on the episode before I told everybody, but that's the thing of like the ego, like the black ego. Like it's like, damn, it's like, but we get to sometimes get to overextend it. And sometimes I think there might need to be some accountability with like Kwame and Stephen A. Smith and definitely Charlemagne. Like Charlemagne has to stop bringing up other people's business for drawing power. I mean, him and the Joe Budden shit, I'm all for that. That's their thing. They're keeping that shit personal. They've been trying to keep that shit private. He want to talk about that shit because he bringing up his thing. That's a different thing. But the Kwame Brown shit, the other shit, nah, bro.
That was foul ball. You don't do that. That was unnecessary, and I was all for what Kwame Brown. Listen, you can't throw stones and then hide your hand when somebody comes to attack you back. He had no right to share his personal business, and with all the stuff that was going, I'm not going to speak on that. Whatever happened with that, but you knew that was coming the minute you start saying it. And I'm watching the video, and I'm like, oh, he is going to get it, and he just kept going, and I'm just like.
Like his whole family, and like to make the excuse, I grew up with his sisters and grew up with everybody, and we like family, and it's like, and then he went on there, gave himself donkey a day, and said everybody from his family. I'm like, dude, if you know you're that close to connected to people, like it's pretty much like everybody in that from that area is like you're all like related, like shit. I think you and Joe Budden are distant related. I think they've said something like that. Because I know he's related to Sky Zoo.
Yeah. Second cousins, right?
Yeah. Some shit like that. Like everybody from that South Carolina, because Joe's family is from like that. Like all of them folks, you live in the Carolinas, like all of them dudes is related.
Yeah. Every last one of them.
Everybody related. Because you take because like they go from the Carolinas up north. Like that's the whole thing. That was always the thing. So like we're not gonna be oblivious of that. And I mean, I think it's a direction of just like being responsible, a lot of like everybody getting the help that they need, and a lot of those things too that happen. But that is that for that episode, man. Y'all digest that, take that in how you need it. Quentin will be back on the next episodes. Hopefully, you know what I'm saying? Hopefully we can get Skylar on the episode with him. Hopefully get him to come out here and be a country boy in Cali sometime soon.
I got my brother stays in Nevada, so I might have to shoot out there one of these days.
I mean, Vegas is cool, man. Everybody is out in Vegas, but you want to plug the podcast again?
Y'all. Y'all have no idea podcast, man. Again, hashtag y'all have no idea podcast again. All social media platforms, all podcast platforms, and just support the movement. And we just gonna roll like that. Shout out to my co-host Sean, who's taking care of her babies, and that's my podcast.
For sure. All right, we are out of here.